Zimbabwe is a country with seemingly hating people. When I'm listening to Janet, Sakile, and also Doc, since our people are ahead, somehow something's not right. Are we going to have fledgling businesses in Zimbabwe with this kind of a population? Right, before you come in, but I think there's something important that I think it's that raised the point on the focus on social and economic rights. I would have loved to have a space where donors actually respond to this. It seems it's fashionable to talk about political rights and civil rights, but then seemingly, like she says, that is ignored. And we have donors here. We need to take conversation around those issues. Maybe on plenary breaks, I think we can have donors responding to those questions. Doc, I'll give you maybe 3 or 4 minutes. Then also my lady there, I give 3 or 4 minutes. Then we have plenary just to tell us whether it's possible to move on.
Moderator, you are biased in your... I'm a man under authority. I'll try and do a 15-minute issue in 4 minutes. So
Okay.
Let me see how far I can
Thank you.
hit this one. One of the things is that, I think that when we look at business, it's to try and raise business to be the fifth state. Because ultimately it is also the inertia of business that has brought us to where we are. They either have been complicit or they just were afraid. They were timid. So I'm just going to give, as a preacher, I like to give some some illustration that might stick, and sometimes some of them are very controversial, and that's deliberate in most cases. Capital is always very timid, like a gazelle, and because it is always pregnant. So it's not always out there to fight because it's carrying something. Capital is not just money, but it's also a mother, and that means it has a skill. So skill and capital are inseparable. So you must always weigh all these conversations we're having, that whilst we're looking at poverty, we must look at where our skills base is at right now to take us out of where we are. So some of the discourses I find, whether in civic society or just in business or in politics, is also just the quality of critical thinking and the skills that we have to bring about a change that we will all admire. We are in a deep hole right now, but I'm not sure whether we have the skill to get us out of the deep hole. That's for debate. A breeding head will not breed if under threat or stress. And here we're talking about rule of law and good governance. I'm just giving you some preamble statements now that I'm been given less time, but I'm sure with more sayings you give me another 5 minutes. A breeding head will only survives with one alpha male. Now I'm going into the controversy side of things. And here, I don't want anybody else to think about it's fighting democracy, but there must be political will and legitimacy. So the one alpha male is literally giving legitimacy and will to the breeding head. So if there isn't that, the business environment is always very difficult to tackle or to engage. Ultimately, the species is sustained by ensuring the strongest and the best genes procreate. In our situation here, we're talking about democratic space that must bring about the best ideas, not an average of everything else. So in our engagement, even in business, we, we are always looking at what are the best ideas that are coming through. And because of where we've been, we are trying to bring about a collage of every idea. And mediocrity prevails. And therefore, we don't ever get critical thinking debates that give us a certain elevation to another stage where our thinking, our behaviors, our civilization, our development is brought to a higher scale than where we are. So when I mean the strongest must survive, I'm not talking about physically strong or weak. I'm talking about the strongest ideas and ideals must be championed and must be proclaimed. The strongest must survive. Developmental market-driven economy is then thrives out of that. So we'll then deal with our poverty issues. So what is the role of business? First and foremost is to actively advise government on policy framework as well as hold them to account. Now, our business has not been successful in doing that consistently. And I think going forward, it is the role of business to champion the policy agenda, to make sure that government is implementing policy that has been bottom up and that to hold them to account. The second thing is get involved in strengthening institutions of governance. Business will not thrive if there is no good governance. Our institutions and our SOEs, state-owned enterprises, there is poor governance there. And so the environment to operate business that will create employment, that will be profitable, is not there yet. The third thing is strengthening and growing SMEs through incubation and raising young entrepreneurs, especially the women. And I'm unapologetic about young and women because when you look at safety in capital, ultimately you've got to look at the young person because they have a future and they would like to create something. The women is because they are custodians of our nation by and large. We can debate that at some point, but at least capital is safe or is safer with women. The fourth is empowering the citizenry through sustainable and pro-development programs and projects to increase the democratic space. So now, the business fraternity in Zimbabwe has depended on international aid to deepen and widen the democratic space whilst they watched. And I think it is about time that private sector comes in and jumps in and takes an active role. And I understand why that has happened, because during the Mugabe era, it was all politicized. Elsewhere in the world, business gets involved, philanthropic activities deepening and widening the political space or the democratic space. In Zimbabwe, you would have been victimized to be part of that process. But I believe that this is the time to then champion that and get out of the closet and be able to do that without feeling that you will be victimized. Now, the problem also when you do that, like what my brother you were saying, is that when you do that, you actually fall victim to the very people you're trying to help. So when I go and see President Mnangagwa, I fall victim and abuse to the people that I'm trying to champion their cause for. And that's how our toxic environment has been. But obviously it doesn't discourage me. But that is the headwinds we face. Because already business or capital is coming from a timid base. So for it now to be intimidated again, it then goes back to it. And then we're not widening, deepening the democratic space. The fifth is the innovation and value addition to our God-given natural resources. We lack innovation at this point because we're just doing more of the same. It is survival business, buying and selling. There are no spaces for innovation, research and development. Those institutions are undercapitalized, under-resourced. And value addition, we are exporting raw resources to the rest of the globe to our detriment. At the center of all this, we are a poor people in a rich country. Very poor people in a very rich country. It's an oxymoron. And I'm going to say something here just for debate, and it's not my position. It looks like to dig ourselves out of this hole, we might need some benevolent autocracy to dig ourselves out of the hole we are in. Because I believe that, in my own understanding, it's going to take a lot longer to get us to an agreement to get us out of here. Now, that is, I'm throwing out there for debate, because sometimes there is stronger leadership that is needed, and then it's almost like in a casualty ward, you don't continue to reason with the patient. You bandage the patient, once and don't touch me, it's hurting, but bandage them so that there's no bleeding. So that's my view there. So I'm not challenging democracy, but I'm saying there might be, and developmental countries that I've seen there has been some autocracy or benevolent autocracy that has got them out of there. And why do I say that? Because at the moment, people prioritize their survival or economic rights ahead of their human rights and their freedoms. So maybe we might as well deal with that first and then get to talk about other rights. Again, I'm throwing some things out there. The vision of the upper middle income earner must be translated to quality of life instead of economic indicators. So the definition it should have been inverted the other way around. Start with the quality of life or lives that we need, then determine the economic indicators that we want to target for. And then we pace ourselves there. So what business is looking for is posturing from government, attitude to the rule of law, attitude to the opening up of the political space, an attitude, their new attitude to democratization, the positions that government is taking, towards democratic institutions, Chapter 12 institutions, the appointment of cabinet, the composition of cabinet and its competence. We are looking at that and seeing how it is doing government business. The long-term development plan, our plans in the past 20, 30 years have been manifestos. So you win the election and then you become, that becomes your development plan. Zima said, for example, it was developed out of a manifesto. So we need a long-term development plan that goes beyond elections. We also need the positions that they will take on national healing, reconciliation, and cohesion. We also want to start seeing proclamations on policy, and we're watching that space very closely. Thank you.
Thank you.